in the second grade, but old enough to know it was serious, when Sister Jacinta, bleary-eyed and wrinkled, announced that our Catholic president had been shot. We rose, hands over our hearts to say the Pledge of Allegiance, then hands together to pray the Our Father. Although I believe all along we understood we were praying for the soul and not the man. What I remember most is Ronnie Mitzel sneezing through everything, a tin of pepper on his desk. For what, I don't recall, perhaps show and tell, but some dark itching powder had gotten into his nose, and somehow I've always known that he enjoyed it, the body betraying itself at that very solemn moment. He was always the class clown, flamboyant one, moved away after graduation like all of us. I never heard from him again until last year when I saw his obituary in the paper. Still single, his address listed as San Francisco. Bodies are flowing back to us from places less parochial. How immune we believed ourselves to be, so far from the swirling locus of events. There are moments like these in history. They hold themselves up like great roaring surfaces, too large to reveal anything but that one single frame from the movie of our own lives. That night, we watched it on TV, the motorcade running the gauntlet, President Kennedy alive and smiling, then dead, alive and smiling, then dead. Jackie, in her short waistcoat and pillbox hat, crawling onto the trunk of the convertible, almost reaching the arms of the Secret Service man, almost going backward for one long moment, while all else rushed forward, then returning to the back seat, to her already dead husband. The motorcade picking up speed and accelerating madly out of view of the camera. Hi, I'm Deb Marquart. Welcome to Poems Across the Distance. I wanted to start this episode with my poem Motorcade. Thoughts of one crisis beget thoughts of another crisis. In this case, the poem Motorcade is about the day that the sisters came to my second grade classroom to tell us that President Kennedy had been assassinated. And in the poem I have the lines, "There are moments like these in history. They hold themselves up like great roaring surfaces, too large to reveal anything but the one single frame from the movie of our own lives." And I think this is the way that crises work. When they're so large, all we can do is focus on one very particular detail. In this case, it was a schoolmate who sneezed through everything, the Pledge of Allegiance, the Our Father, that we were forced to stand up and recite. Because I think the sisters thought words spoken, even words from rote memory, were powerful against silence. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about Judy Woodruff, the PBS news anchor who interrupted her March 14th broadcast to admonish people for hoarding toilet paper and hand sanitizer. And she said, "This is the time for the lucky, healthy ones to think of others. This is the moment for Americans to show our best qualities." Judy Woodruff figures in my memory on another day of crisis. On that morning, September 11th, 2001, I got up and drove into the sunrise across the state of Iowa to a small college town where I was scheduled to give a poetry reading and visit classes. And when I met up with my host at the media lab, we saw the first images, the first tower being hit, and then as we stood there in stunned silence, the second tower. My host said we needed to walk to the class, if only to tell them what had happened. As we walked across that beautiful green campus, we carried this heavy burden. The students were a naive population for those final moments before we came to tell them what had happened. And I felt compelled to say something to them. I'd been invited as a poet to read poetry, but what poetry on a day like this? So I read this poem, Motorcade, because it was a chronicle of a day in my life when I felt the world tip on its axis. And there are lines in the poem, how immune we believed ourselves to be, so far from the swirling locus of events. By those lines I meant to say, we're all touched by these acts of violence. We're all changed. And that brings me back to Judy Woodruff. On the day of 9/11, after the college I was visiting canceled classes, I got in my car and drove west across that same landscape that I had traveled just a few hours earlier. Everything had looked so beautiful and sun-dappled, fields of soybeans just waving this gold rust that they take on in the fall, and the corn had those sort of gossamer ears. But now it was just miles to cross to get home. And when I got home, I got into bed, turned on CNN, and just watched for hours the coverage, just trying to understand what was happening, worried about the people who were close to ground zero. And I know there were other people on the news desk that day, Aaron Brown, probably Wolf Blitzer, all the reporters on the ground. But Judy Woodruff was the person who saved me. She was my lifeline. Her long, thin face, her calm, gray-blue eyes, the steady tone of her low voice, reporting, questioning, theorizing, consoling. She gave me the feeling that we were going to get through this. And years later, in a documentary about that day, she said about the chaos. Through it all, reporters kept reporting, audio technicians kept checking audio, and producers kept monitoring the information coming in. And it was a sight of her so calmly doing her job that day that acted as a small adhesive for me. I want to end this episode by reading a poem by Chinese poet Li Po from the 8th century. His poem reaches across 13 centuries to tell us what it means to live in solitude and loneliness, and it's a poem called Drinking Alone by Midnight. A pot of wine in the flower garden, but no friends drink with me. So I raise my cup to the bright moon and to my shadow, which makes us three. But the moon won't drink, and my shadow just creeps about my heels. Yet in your company, moon and shadow, I have a wild time till spring dies out. I sing and the moon shudders. My shadow staggers when I dance. We have our fun while I can stand, then drift apart when I fall asleep. Let's share this empty journey often, and meet again in the milky river of stars. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time on Poems Across the Distance. I'm Deb Marquart. Thank you.